Give me Awesome, cool. So welcome to the webinar. Abadesi, founder and CEO of Hustle Crew here, and we're going to spend the next hour talking about stress-free career strategies. Please go ahead and get your phones out and scan the QR code, or if you have a second screen or just a second tab open, head to the website menti.com and use the code 46960553. If you're not familiar with Menti, it's just an interactive tool. I find when I'm facilitating with a group where people aren't super familiar with each other, they don't really know each other, or maybe it's like a really big group, it's a lot easier to use Menti because it allows for anonymous interaction and anonymous questions. So with that in mind, let's jump into the agenda. As I mentioned, people will be streaming in. If at any point we get disconnected, just hang on as well. I'll make sure I rejoin as soon as I can. So what are we going to cover today? Well, I had a bunch of questions submitted from all of you when you registered, and I did my very best to summarize them and make sure we cover them in the agenda. But maybe there's something that is more front of mind for you today. So if there is anything that's more front of mind for you, it might be around boundaries. It might be around feeling motivated in the new year. Maybe it's something around teams, returning to work. I know a lot of folks are spending more time in the office, maybe struggling with the commute. But if there's anything specific you hope to get out of today's workshop, this is your chance to share. Oh, and if you haven't had a chance to get onto Menti yet, you can just open Menti in another browser and use the code 46960553. Also, feel free to use the chat if you prefer. Well, while you're thinking of that, let me jump onto the agenda and share what we'll be covering. We're going to start with confidence and career progression. So a lot of the questions that came in focused on this idea of how do I build up my confidence in the workplace? How do I build the right mindset to get to where I want to go? How do I transition into a new role, pivot into a new role? So we're going to spend the first part of the workshop on that. The second part of the workshop, we're actually going to talk a little bit about dealing with difficult teammates. So there are a lot of questions around this, everything from navigating difficult conversations, working with folks who don't share your values, maybe working with folks where you have a personality clash. So I'm going to share specific tactics that I have tried that work for me. And then finally, I'm going to close with my top stress-free strategies. So yeah, in all of these sections, I'll be sharing tools and tactics and strategies, but I'll also be leaving you with some homework. It's really important, I think, that you can put this all into practice after the session. So the homework really is a way for you to stay accountable to all the learnings today. So let's start with confidence and career progression strategies. Again, the QR code to join Menti is flashed on the slide. If you do have questions as we are going along, please feel free to pop them in the chat. There'll also be slides where you can ask questions as we go. So I'm really curious to hear from all of you. What do you struggle with most when it comes to confidence and planning your career progression? Is it negative self-talk, limiting beliefs, insecurities? Maybe it's lack of an adequate support system like managers and mentors. Maybe it's just lack of structure. Maybe you're just someone who knows what you want to do, but is really just struggling to put that structure into place to stay accountable. Maybe it's setting priorities because you've got a lot of responsibilities. I just think it'd be really nice to kind of see where you fall on that spectrum. You can vote for multiple things as well. So if it's a few of those things, let us know. Okay. So looking at the results, I can see that for a lot of folks, it's definitely a mindset thing, and I can relate to that. In my last corporate role, I was a vice president in a global team for 500 people. Most of the vice presidents were engineers. It was a software company, or they were AI researchers. And I was in more of a culture role as the VP of community and belonging. And I had a huge amount of imposter syndrome showing up to our exec meetings. And I was also one of the few women, one of the only people of color. And, you know, as a non-technical leader in a very technical company, I struggled so much with believing that I could take up space and show up there and push for my agenda and my strategy. I can also see a lot of folks are resonating with lack of certainty on what's the next best step for me. And I hope that lots of the tactics I'll share today will shed some light on that, as well as juggling a lot of priorities. If you look at my career, for example, if you go on my LinkedIn page, see the awards that I've won, or read articles about me, I'm sure it probably looks like I've built like a very intentional career and I've planned every step of the journey, but that's not true at all. I always think of the Steve Jobs quote. He said that you can only connect the dots looking backwards, and that's how he built his career. And you know, he was a college dropout that went on to build one of the most successful tech companies. And I think a lot of folks are looking for clarity and certainty in a world that's full of uncertainty and ambiguity. So one of the mindsets that I hope you'll be able to adopt throughout this workshop and moving forward is more of a growth mindset, where you are adapting in real time, acknowledging the setbacks, learning from them, and evolving with them. Cool. So let's jump into this section. Thanks everyone for your responses. That's really helpful. Some of the first strategies we're going to cover are in this bit. So yeah, what works for me? I think one of the things that's really, really, really important to focus on is creating self-care rituals and mental health rituals that fill you with self-confidence and self-worth. I saw that a lot of people were struggling with the mindset to promote confidence and progress. And I think that is not surprising given the types of teams that we work in and the types of roles that we're in. We're living in a world where burnout is very, very common and people are really, really stressed. I just spent a lot of my Christmas holidays in the Philippines, in a very small part of the Philippines where my mom grew up. And you know, it's island life. People there do like one thing a day. The idea of like sitting at a screen on like 8 hours of Zoom calls is so far removed from most of my aunts and uncles that live there. And I just thought about how their baseline level of stress is so much lower than mine when I live in London and I'm like commuting and rushing around. You know, I'm passing thousands of people on my way to my co-working space, thousands of people on my way home. But if you're in a more rural or remote place, you might pass 10 people in a day, if that. And the reason I mention that is that we kind of take for granted the fact that you know, our minds aren't necessarily designed to operate at that speed, and we really need to intentionally create time to slow down. So what works for me is really making sure I have those self-care rituals in place. I have those mental health rituals in place. I also think it's really important to get support and accountability. So whether that's content like podcasts that you're listening to, podcasts about feeling self-confident, feeling self-esteem, whatever it is, you know, what can be that coach for you? Identify it and bring that into your life. And if you have the privilege of, you know, financial freedom, financial flexibility, then maybe even think about investing in professional help to help you elevate your mindset and stay positive. That might look like a coach, that might look like a course, that might look like therapy, that might look like a community. I'm in a group with a few other Black female founders, and we meet every month and we follow the Young Presidents Association framework. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you can check it out, YPA. And it's basically a very structured check-in and support group. And it's been amazing to be in that community for over a year. The other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of confidence and progression is to just set really realistic timelines. A lot of us are like, why haven't I achieved that pay rise yet? I've been thinking about this for months. Well, your company might only do pay rises once a year, or maybe only once a year if they're profitable, and last year they weren't profitable. So think about setting timelines that are realistic so that you genuinely can make progress on them instead of feeling like you're failing. the other few things I wanted to say on this are when it comes to not knowing what's the best thing to do, not knowing what's the exact perfect next step, maybe getting into the mindset that there are multiple best next steps, multiple paths forward. And the goal is really to just put yourself out there and do the work. One of the things that works for me is to like stop being afraid of failure and rejection. And now I see failures and rejections as learning opportunities. I'm not afraid to hear no. I'm not afraid to hear not right now if I'm pitching Hustle Crew for work, if I'm pitching myself for a speaking opportunity. And one of the things that's really helped me build my confidence is having receipts of my good work and positive feedback. So I have a folder, my Yay folder, and it's all the evidence that I have that I'm a good person and I do good work, screenshots of Slack messages, of emails, of text messages. And then the final thing I wanted to say here is sometimes in a team, in a workplace, we forget to zoom out and align our career progress plans with the companies, with the teams, with our managers. One of the things that I always try to do to create a new role for myself within the team or to get a promotion is to build a story for why that makes sense for the company as well, or for my manager as well, or for the team as well. So the homework I have for you is for you to think of achievable self-worth or self-care rituals that you can do on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. These are the things where you are going to, over time, over a year, over 2 years, really feel like I am amazing at what I do. I do good work. I deserve good things. I deserve great opportunities. And also design your network of partners that give you support, partners that hold you accountable, partners that help you learn. They might be colleagues, they might be friends, they might be virtual connections. And then set your progress along SMART goals. And SMART goals are like time bound, they're measurable. Highly recommend looking up that acronym if you're not familiar with SMART goals. And do that on a like super realistic timeline, right? So don't say, in 1 month's time, I will have doubled my salary. If, well, first of all, not in this economy, but also not if, you're applying for roles where there's rounds and rounds of interviews, and the interviews process alone could take months, and then the negotiation might take months. And, you want to make sure that you're being realistic, because that's what's going to keep you motivated. If you keep setting unrealistic goals, you're going to always stay demotivated, and that's also going to feed into that mindset of limiting self-talk. So I am going to pause there with the homework. And well, actually, one more thing. I thought it could be really good for you to experiment with failure and rejection to help you build up your tolerance for hearing no or not yet. So if there's an art project kicking around that you've always wanted to try, maybe now's the time to apply for Arts Council funding. If there is a job you saw on LinkedIn that's, the absolute dream job for a year's time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, when you're more experienced or more ready, why not apply for it now? Just to, embrace the fear, any opportunity really. And if you're not already building that brag folder, that yay folder, start doing it now, taking screenshots of praise and compliments. And then I thought you should try and craft a compelling ask that you can make of your boss or your team to help you further your goals. It might not be a pay rise. Maybe it's going on training. Maybe it's getting a mentor. Maybe it's getting a masterclass subscription, whatever it might be. What is an ask that you can tailor to the wider needs of your team, of your company, that also furthers your goals as a way for you to show that you have the ability to align your personal goals with the team's goals and the company's goals, and you can see where there are parallels and overlap. So I'll of course be sharing the link to the deck with you, but these are your homework tasks. I'm not expecting you to get these all done in a day, but my hope is that you can list these all out and spend 1 hour a week, a fortnight, a month working through all of these tasks. And I think if you do work through all these tasks, you will genuinely start to feel more positive in terms of the mindset and the confidence you bring to career progress. So before we move on from this topic of mindsets, confidence, and career progression, I wanted to give you a chance to ask any questions that you feel I didn't cover on this part of the agenda. I'll just pause for a sec and let you Okay, well, just as a reminder, you can join the Menti anytime by going onto menti.com and using the code at the top of the screen. You can also pop your questions into the chat function. Well, let's move on to the second part of the agenda. The second part of the agenda is dealing with difficult teammates. Oh, sorry, I'll just pause. Janet has a question. Yes, Janet, please feel free to unmute or ask it in the chat, whatever works for you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Please, I'm calling from Nigeria, and
nice.
I'm awaiting service NYSC, and for my NYSC, I planned on getting a job before applying or before being set for service. I don't want to apply for NYSC before I am sure of the place I'm going to work. For example, I was thinking of many cities, but then I wasn't sure of the job that I want. So, and also I want a job that can grow in the process. I can elevate. I don't only want something that the government, because NYSC, the government will give you the job, but then I don't want something that I'm going to be stagnant. So you talked about confidence and career progression. So what will you think I would do in this process so that I can get a job that can grow my career?
That's a great question. And I guess pleasure. For folks who aren't familiar, in Nigeria, people do like a national youth service. So that was what Janet was referring to with NYSC. One of the things that I did at the beginning of my career, really the first part of my career, the first decade, was take the opportunities that were available and then grow within them. Like my first job was as an editorial intern at the Financial Times. I got that job through a diversity scheme. That was during the credit crunch in 2009. And therefore, the next job I did, honestly, was just the first one that hired me. I was working for a company owned by the Daily Mail, running conferences for investment bankers. That was not what I dreamed of doing, and it wasn't necessarily what really interested me. And I didn't know much about the company, whether there were growth opportunities, whether they would treat me well. But in the time that I was there, I did everything I could to gain experiences, and I used those experiences to then interview for other roles. So if I were in your shoes right now, I wouldn't worry too much about the company or the job title. I would just worry about getting an opportunity. And then once I have the opportunity, doing everything I can in that opportunity to gain skills and to build my network. Because that's really what building a career is all about. Until you know exactly like what your niche is and what you want to focus on, it's about building experiences and building connections. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, so dealing with difficult teammates. Back to polls. Very curious to hear from you all. When it comes to dealing with difficult teammates, what do you struggle with most? Is it teammates don't share your values? Maybe it's personality clash. Is it that teammates are not aware of how their bias or their behaviors affect people? Maybe it's more about how you're perceived by your teammates. Maybe it feels like you're not professional enough or you're not the right culture fit. Maybe it's more about your relationship with leadership. You feel like leadership aren't aligned with your views or your approach. Or maybe you feel pigeonholed in your job, stuck in a rut. You feel like you are just seen in one particular way and you really want to break out of that. Curious to hear from you. All right. So yeah, I can see that a lot of folks are dealing with teammates who aren't appreciative of how their behavior is affecting the wider team. And I guess, that's parallels with teammates not sharing your values or like clashing with your personality. And of course, it's also really frustrating when leadership aren't aligned with your views or your approach. I mean, I mentioned my previous VP role earlier, but I remember one of the heads of one of the largest departments always clashed with me because he just didn't understand the value of my role and he didn't support my initiatives. And I had to spend a lot of time justifying my work before I could even then start talking about how he could help make my work successful. And that was really taxing and really draining. However, fast forward 2.5 years later, when he left the company, I was one of the people that he called out in his leaving speech. And he said, I really appreciate the work that you did. And, I recognize that I wasn't super supportive at the start, but I really come around because I realized how valuable it is. So, if I could do that to someone who was literally like really not into my work and my views, hopefully you can too. And that's what the next tactics are all about. Thanks for sharing, everyone. Really appreciate that. So, the first thing I want to talk about is if you struggle to initiate dialogue with these teammates, right? The ones who are not aware of their biases, they're not aware of their behavior. One of the things that will be really helpful is for you to be extremely structured in how you navigate any conversation that's difficult. For example, you having to give them constructive feedback, you having to confront them about something. So the two frameworks I've mentioned here, which to be honest could be their own workshop, and we actually do workshops on these things at Hustle Crew. So, I'm not going to be able to do them justice now in this summary. The first one is COIN. And COIN is an acronym, so it stands for context, observation, impact, and next steps. And it's basically a way for you to unpack a scenario. For example, a microaggression in a meeting, an awkward moment during a client pitch. And you can literally write it out like a script and, print it out, email it to them in advance, go through it in the conversation. You can then invite them to use the same framework to explain the same situation from their perspective. So like, hi, at that client event, I felt really uncomfortable when you made a joke about this. The context was, this is a really important deal for us. I observed that as soon as you made that joke, the client started to feel really uncomfortable. The impact of this is I'm now worried that we're going to lose that business opportunity. The next steps for me are, I would really like you to like refrain from making jokes. If you can't guarantee that these jokes are going to be inclusive or whatever it might be. So as I said, COIN is something that we're big fans of at Hustle Crew because it removes the tension from a difficult conversation, and both sides of the table can use it. Another framework that's really helpful for dealing with difficult colleagues, difficult conversations, is nonviolent communication. Again, something that is worthy of its own workshop. But if you're not super familiar with nonviolent communication, recommend reading up on it or watching a few YouTube videos about it. Nonviolent communication is not just used in work, it's used in, therapy, couples therapy, family dynamics. And it's just a way to remind people of how their words and actions make you feel. So using that same scenario of, someone making a joke at a client pitch that makes, their colleague feel uncomfortable, you might revisit that and say, hey, can I talk to you about the client pitch and some of the feelings I've had since then? I really value you as a teammate. However, I feel that our meeting should be a place where I feel safe and I feel like no one's going to be victimized or attacked in some way. And when you made that joke at the expense of women or whatever group, that makes me feel like I'm not safe at work and I'm not safe around you. And I don't like that. So, again, it's just a way to inject a lot of empathy into this situation and not just start from an accusation of like, oh, you messed up, which then immediately puts someone on the defensive. So another thing that has really helped me keep myself stress-free dealing with difficult teammates is picking my battles. Let's face it, as a human being, you don't change unless you want to change. Your parents can't make you change. Your romantic partners can't make you change. Your friends can't make you change. Your personal trainers can't make you change. The only person who can make you change is you, right? And, that also means that your colleagues aren't going to change just because you give them constructive feedback or just because you tell them to, or just because you tell them how it makes you feel. And there's a real sense of almost relief once you accept that, because it gives you the power to pick your battles. If there's someone who you're always locking horns with, you never see eye to eye, XYZ, is the juice worth the squeeze? Yes, you could confront them about them. Yes, you could challenge them, but what do you gain? This kind of goes to that bottom bullet point. What's in it for you? At the end of the day, you're not a parent. You're not responsible for everyone on your team. You're responsible for what you've been hired to do, your goals, and your responsibilities. So I do think it's almost about those emotional boundaries that you can uphold. And what I wanted to say as well was like never pour from an empty cup. Like a lot of us are like feeling the January energy. We're tired, we're cold, we're dreaming of summer holiday. If your energy reserves are already low, why should you then take on that additional responsibility of using your few energy reserves to try and influence someone else's behavior? So just be super mindful of how you are using your energy. A few little things on what works for me dealing with difficult teammates, and then a bit of homework for you. You don't always have to be the person to have a conversation, whether that's constructive feedback, whether that's identifying areas of improvement and change across the culture, across the company. You can identify allies and sponsors who can also, echo what you're saying or repeat what you're saying, share their own views. And in a similar way, you can work with others to build a case for further training, for the support, for the team. Maybe there is a need for some type of bias training to take place, or at least some type of communication training. Let's do a nonviolent communication training all together as a team. Let's do handling difficult conversations training all together as a team. Let's learn about coin model. Let's think about how we can use these tools together. I also think it's important to take a long-term view. Someone who is very cranky today might not be cranky 6 months from now, 12 months from now. Some people might have stuff going on in their family, in their relationships. And, it can be really difficult to assume positive intent when there are repeat offenders. But it's also liberating to know that frankly, 10 years from now, you're just not going to care about this. So take a long-term view if you can. That really helped me. Like there are people who in the moment I wanted to strangle in my mind, not in real life. And then I would just say to myself, this won't matter in 5 years. This won't matter in 10 years. And that really helped me. The other thing which can feel really empowering, again, if you have really difficult teammates, is just imagining your plan B or your exit strategy. I think it was Heidi Klum, like there was a famous supermodel who said she wouldn't get out of bed for less than, I don't know, is Linda Evangelista. I can't remember. But anyway, one of the 90s supermodels was like, I won't get out of bed for less than $1 million or something crazy. But I just like that energy because it's like she knows what her, boundaries are. And if a client can't put up with that, then she won't work with them. So what's your, plan B? What's your exit strategy? What gives you power in those moments where you just have had enough? And I think fantasizing about that is actually really powerful. Cool. So my homework for you on this topic of dealing with difficult teammates is to read up on nonviolent communication and the coin model. If you're not a reader, you can find podcasts about it, you can find videos about it. And then I want you to think of a recent disagreement you had sometime over 2024, over the last few months. Maybe it was around the time of your performance review. Maybe it was around the time you worked on a really challenging project, a really challenging client. Whatever it is, I'd like you to think of how you could revisit that with the stakeholders involved using nonviolent communication, using the coin model. Really, this is just a way for you to, get ingrained with the learnings and practice it so that you can use them more effectively in the future. And then I think a really powerful exercise is for you to also think about your current role in the context of the responsibilities you have now, also in the context of like where you would like to grow in your role. Maybe you are in a regional role and you want to go global. Maybe you want to have more direct reports. Maybe you want to have your first direct report, whatever it is. Think about your current role and think about who are the most important relationships. Like who really matters. Because what I find super interesting about human psychology is that once someone grates on us, they start to take up a lot of headspace. It's like that meme, living in my head rent free. Now, when someone starts living in your head rent free, it's almost like they have a disproportionate influence on your well-being and your time, but they might not actually be that important to your role and to your progress in the company. So hopefully doing this exercise of mapping out who really matters to you on your team can also be a really powerful reminder of the relationships that you do need to nurture the most. So I really hope that that helps. I do have more homework for you. As I said, don't feel the pressure to get this all done right away. Like, you can work on this, chip away on this, over the first half of this year, whatever feels realistic for you. Map out your current allies and sponsors in your team. Yes, there are people you don't get along with. Fine, that's always going to be the case. There are people in my family I don't get along with. C'est la vie. But it's really important to focus on the people that you do get along with and the people who do support you. So maybe making that list will be a powerful way for you to think, well, do you know what? It's not so bad. I've got people on my side. I thought another nice gesture that you might want to do is just pay them a compliment or write them a thank you note. The next time you're really frustrated with one of the difficult teammates, you can just say something really positive to one of the not difficult teammates as a way to move your energy from a negative space to a positive space, and from a place of frustration to a place of gratitude. The final thing here is more around, not pouring from an empty cup and enforcing your boundaries. So I thought it would be good for you to reflect on a recent time you took on a responsibility you now regret. Maybe you volunteered to organize the Christmas drinks. Maybe you volunteered to organize the Christmas cards, or maybe you volunteered to organize something and you said yes a little too hastily, perhaps, and now you regret that. I want you to think of how you would have said no respectfully, even when they were like, oh, but you're the perfect person to do it. Oh, this won't take long at all. Please help. How would you go back in that moment and actually be like, thank you, but no? So that's my homework for you. As I said, I will be sharing the recording and the slides. And hopefully that will be a really good way for you to enforce some of these tools around navigating difficult conversations, building your network internally of supporters and allies, and also building up your own confidence to say no and push back on things. Cool. So before we move on to the third and final section, I am just going to pause. If you have any questions, feel free to jump onto the Menti or pop them in the chat. I'll give you a minute. So one question has come in. Do you have any advice on when to tackle something with a difficult teammate yourself versus draft in support from leadership? I think this depends on a bunch of variables. So if I were in your situation, I would be thinking about how many times has this person been difficult? Like, how many times has it been recorded in instances beyond just interactions with me? Because I think one of the things about asking leadership's help is that, like, it can present you as someone who, one, isn't proactive to resolve things on your own, or two, isn't respectful of leadership's time and time constraints. So, I mean, again, it completely depends on the team that you're in. But I know in the past, in the startups that I worked for, leadership wouldn't want me to come to them with a problem until I had exhausted every route to try and resolve it myself. So if you haven't taken this teammate into a conversation using tools like nonviolent communication, using tools like the COIN model, I would do that first. And if there are other people who have struggled with this teammate, I would also share resources like this webinar with them and encourage them to do the same. And then, give this person a significant period to prove that they have heard the feedback. So give them a few more meetings, give them, a month or two. And after that period of time, you can then go to leadership and, have that demonstrable timeline where you're like, on this day, I said, please don't do this again. And then 3 days later, they did. And then 10 days later, they did. And now we need your help. We need to escalate it. That would be my advice. Hopefully it's helpful. Okay, so let's move on to the third and final part. And this is all about my top 3 stress-free strategies. So before we jump into them, it's poll time again. Really curious to hear from you. What do you struggle with most when it comes to keeping your career, your job, your day-to-day stress-free? So feel free to jump back into the Menti using the code 46960553. But yeah, would love to hear from you. Is it that you are just struggling with time management and staying focused? Is it that you just have a lot going on in your role, in your personal life? Is it that, it's hard to manage mental health and overall well-being? Maybe you're putting too much pressure on yourself. I can relate to that. Most successful people are just like insecure overachievers. I mean, I've never watched Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, but every clip I've ever seen is like some sob story of how someone didn't get enough attention when they were young, so now they're taking over the world. But yeah, I think there's definitely a parallel between drive and ambition, and ultimately maybe like not enough self-compassion. That's the other side of the coin. We're almost never enough. We never feel like we've done enough, and I certainly relate to that. It's partly how I was raised. It's partly how I have raised myself. So yeah, I definitely put a lot of pressure on myself, and I'm very, very impatient. So I can relate to that. I do actually think it is a good thing, but it's something that if you're not aware of, can lead to cycles of burnout, which is certainly something that I have struggled with and still do, and I've spoken about a lot. So in this next section, I'm going to talk through what has really helped me put less pressure on myself, while still building a thriving career. What has really helped me get comfortable with saying no and understanding what my limits are, and how to protect those limits a lot sooner, not just waiting until I get burned out to do that. I'm also going to talk to you about what's worked for me in terms of managing my well-being, my mental health, doing my best to stay focused. Of course, I still get distracted. I have like so many tabs open right now, you can't even guess. But I've definitely found things that have really worked for me. And same in terms of like juggling priorities and responsibilities. So here's what's worked for me. And then I've got some homework to help you take action afterwards. So what's been really big for me over the last 2 years or so is just having non-negotiable time blocks. And I think it's really important for me to like use this opportunity to say I'm not a caregiver, because if I was a caregiver, I think it would be maybe less realistic. So if you are a caregiver, like I have empathy for you, but I think wherever we are on the scale of responsibility and free time, we should really try and have some kind of non-negotiable time blocks for things that recharge our batteries, give us energy, boost our well-being, and our mental health. So, for example, some people get to Friday and they're stressed because they haven't had any time to do focused work. They've had so many meetings, so many things going on. Maybe one of the things you need to do is schedule time for that deep focused work, in the middle of the week, a few little chunks a day, so that you don't feel this need to stay late on Friday or catch up on the weekend. That's just done, and that helps you stay balanced. Maybe it's going outside for a walk, going to a yoga class at the gym. Maybe it's even just remembering to eat. Some people are so busy. I used to be so busy, I wouldn't even remember to eat. And then I'd be super hangry and take it all out on my husband when I was working from home, which he didn't like. So, whatever it is, make sure you've got that blocked out in the calendar. And, that is an automatic decline when someone tries to put a call there or whatever. Now, the second one I think is obviously a lot harder for women of color, because we already face a bit of a likability bias, a likability penalty, in that, it's so easy for us to be seen as mean or aggressive or bitchy. That said, as I've gotten older, I have realized people can respect you and not like you, and that's okay, right? And I think it's more important to be respected than to be liked. Do your work, do it undeniably well, keep the receipts, keep the records of your achievement. And who cares about the rest? You know, are you marrying your boss? Are you marrying your colleague? Are you running away to a desert island with the person that sits down the road from you, like corridor from you? No. So then fine, like you do your work, you do it respectfully, and then you get on with your lives. So I do think it's important to mature to a place where you kind of go, this is who I am, and you are you, I am me. We respect each other. We get on with it. And you know, linking to that, it's so important to not be afraid to make others feel uncomfortable when you stand up for yourself. You know, when I was in my first roles in the corporate world, people would make jokes, touch my hair without my permission, touch me. And I was so uncomfortable in that moment, but I was afraid. I was afraid to be honest because I was worried that they'd think I'm boring, or they'd think I'm lame, or they'd think, you know, I'm not fun. And in those moments, I let my discomfort take a backseat to other people's discomfort. And again, now that I'm older, I want to build a career on my terms. You know, if you are making me feel uncomfortable with your body language, with your choice of words, with your jokes, whatever it is, I'm going to say it. Because I'd rather say it to you now for free than say it later in therapy that cost me a lot of money. And I don't want to be talking about work in therapy. I want to talk about like my marriage. I want to talk about my family. I want to talk about the things that I believe are a priority, you know, for me and my relationship with my therapist. So I think not having that fear of speaking up for yourself is, again, you know, back to that idea of like, you know, I command respect, and that is not respectful. You know, please be respectful. And if you are, you know, to the last bullet, keeping your receipts, focusing on your output, you know, then it's undeniable the work that you do. You know, what you do can be measured. Whatever role you're in, you can get that feedback, you can get those data points, track them and keep them. And if someone tries to come for you, you pull out that folder and you're like, you know what? I did tell him that joke wasn't funny. And you know what? It wasn't. And guess what? I'm still bringing in the deals, or I'm still keeping the team happy. And that's what matters. That's what we should be talking about. We shouldn't be talking about an adult person who can't regulate their emotions or their behavior. And if you ever want to script that type of conversation, just email me because I've had many of them, and I've had a lot of practice, and I can help you. So, other things that work for me, asking for help. It took me a long, long time to get comfortable doing this. Truthfully, still struggle. At the tender age of 37, still struggle with this. But I do think it's really important to just ask for help. Like if you are starting to feel pressured, anxious, stressed, articulate that. Oh, I'm starting to feel a bit nervous about this project. I'm starting to feel a bit anxious about that project. I'm worried about this deadline. I'm worried that I'm, you know, slow on that, late on that. That is what a team is for. Even if you're a freelancer, you are freelancing in a team. Even if you're a founder, you are, you know, a business owner with support, with clients. So as soon as you are starting to feel worried about a deadline, delivering something, whatever it might be, articulate that and express that, because for all you know, the goalpost could change. Someone could step in and help you so you can delegate something to them and free up some of your capacity. You know, people in your personal life that might have been asking you for things can take a step back and go, you know what, you don't have the headspace for this, you don't have the energy for this, I'll come back to you another time. So yeah, ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. The most successful people have helpers. You know, when like Beyonce was like, I woke up like this. I was like, okay, she woke up like that. Then her makeup artist did her face. Then her hairstylist did her hair. Her personal chef gave her her breakfast smoothie. Her personal trainer moved her limbs around and helped her body stay light. Like, you know, everyone gets help. So why are you trying to be a superhero and not have help? I think another thing is to do the work of understanding why you put that pressure on yourself, why you're so impatient, why you never feel like it's enough. I'm speaking, you know, from my own personal experience here, going into a trusted, safe space and unpacking why I worry about things like whether I'm successful enough or have enough money or I'm doing well enough, you know, understanding where that came from, and understanding that I get to decide what successful enough is, and I get to decide what kind of life I want to live. I get to design that. What a privilege, what a joy to design that. that has been really, really helpful for me. So if you haven't had that opportunity to do, the work, spiritual work, personal growth, whatever you want to call it, highly recommend doing it. Especially if you're like getting a bit older now. Like I said, I'm already in my 30s. So, if you are in your 30s, that's definitely a good time to start thinking about that. Final two things here: become your own best friend. Again, this is something that came out of a lot of my like reading from people like Gabrielle Bernstein, or reading The Artist's Way, watching Oprah Super Soul Sundays. I would see all of these incredible, powerful women that I admire, and I just hear all of them saying that, they treat themselves like they're their number one fan, like they're their best friends. They go on a spa date solo, they go to their favorite restaurant solo, they look in the mirror and they use all these positive mantras like, you're beautiful, you're amazing, you're powerful, you're gorgeous. And at first I was like, does that really work? 2 years later, I can tell you it does. It actually works. Our brains, we're actually quite basic. We're just like a sponge. We just absorb what we are around. And if what we are around is that positive self talk and these pleasurable experiences, a bubble bath, a Netflix binge, our favorite takeaway, we really react and respond to that in quite a positive way, where we kind of think life is good. I'm doing well. So, yeah, really, really recommend becoming your own best friend, and, dating yourself, hanging out with yourself, and bigging yourself up. And then the final thing to say on this, and really the kind of final lesson before I move on to your final bits of homework: be aware of what triggers stress, and don't wait until you're burnt out to rest. So you might be in a very project driven role, and it might be that every time you get to the end of the project, you get sick, or, you crash. So maybe what you need to do is actually have a break halfway through that project, so that when you get to the end of the project, you've had that opportunity to recharge. So yeah, be aware of what triggers stress and make sure you're scheduling rest around that. So here's my homework for you. So the first two things are just like a repeat from other homework, which is great. Basically, like, think of time where you didn't uphold your boundaries and you let yourself get stressed. And now think of what you would say to stand up for yourself and say no. The second two things are more fun things. Design a self-worth boosting solo date. What are you going to do to big yourself up, remind yourself how amazing you are, and really just rest and de-stress? Take yourself to the cinema and watch a film. Take yourself to your favorite coffee shop with a magazine. Order a pastry and your favorite hot drink. And now look at your calendar, for the rest of this week. Is there anywhere where you can reduce stress? Is there a meeting that you can push to the following week? Is there a meeting that you can turn into an email exchange or a Google Doc? And is there an opportunity to increase rest? Is there a social event where you can say, do you know what? I've seen enough of you guys. I'm going to pass on this one, and I'm going to run a bubble bath and listen to an audiobook, whatever it might be. You are in control of your own time, and you are also responsible for managing your own well-being and mental health. No one else is. So give yourself that gift. And final little bits of homework for me: reflecting on your last burnout. What were the warning signs, and how can you get better at noticing those warning signs? For me, it was wanting to stay in bed all the time, not making any effort. Like, I couldn't remember the last time I washed my hair. I was wearing like the same hoodie for the third week in the row. I could see that I was not caring about basic fundamental things, appearance, health. That's when I knew I was really plummeting in the dregs of burnout. Design your well-being regime and put time blocks in your calendar. Maybe your well-being regime is cooking yourself like a really healthy packed lunch, or a really, hearty breakfast. Put time blocks in your calendar so that you've got time to meal prep on Sunday or in the morning before you go to the office. Maybe your well-being regime is having time to read a novel that you love, or, I don't know, do your watercolor set, go for a walk in the park, whatever it is, play your guitar. Make sure that, you can time block your weekend. You don't just need to time block work days. You can time block all of your time, and make sure you are blocking out those bits. And then think about where in your work you can enforce better boundaries, and think about different approaches you can use for boundaries. Some people, you tell them, hey, no is no, and they listen. Other people, they're not listening to you. So you might need to have boundaries by actively ignoring them or avoiding them, leaving their messages on read. You need different approaches for different people because everyone is different and people respond and react to your interactions with them in different ways. So again, how you enforce boundaries with one person might work for them, won't work for the next person. So you almost need a boundaries toolkit, and every person has a different boundary approach. That's what I've learned. So yeah, be mindful of that and think of all the different approaches you can have. So as we're in the final few minutes of the webinar, I would love for you to share your feedback, but of course also ask questions. So here is a URL. Please click on it if you still have your mobile handy and you have Menti open, just click on tinyurl.com. Alternatively, you can click the link or just head there. We've got literally only like 4 minutes left. I will also be sharing the recording. But let me know if you have any questions. They can go in the chat or you can unmute. But now's your time. Well, hopefully this has been helpful to you. Oh, here we go. Someone coming through in the chat. Oh, someone was just asking if I have any plans to run more sessions on work-related topics. Yes, definitely. In fact, one of the questions in the feedback form is what other topics should I cover? What other topics would be helpful? So if you haven't had a chance to fill out the feedback form, please do. I'd love to hear from you. I also love to hear from you on email. You can like reply to the email that sent you the invitation and let us know what other topics you'd like to cover. You can DM us on social media. We're at Hustle Crew Live. We also have a Substack where we post on career topics all the time. The final thing I want to say on this is I know I gave you all a lot of homework. So one of the things that I'm going to gift to you is a free mini coaching session with me. It's only 20 minutes. I usually do like an hour, even longer. But I thought it might be really helpful off the back of the workshop if you actually have an opportunity to talk through some of those action points that I mentioned one-on-one. As I said, these are all things that I do and I've been doing. So hopefully we can have a bit of time to think of how you can really put them in action for yourself. So feel free to click on that link, tinyurl.com/Abidesi quick call. I'll also email it around when I email the slides. But yeah, I look forward to helping you out. And thank you, everyone. I'm just going to wrap it up there. It's been such a treat to be with you this afternoon. Thanks for showing up. Good luck with everything, and I'll speak to you soon. See you. I'll send the recording out very soon. Bye-bye.